hello and welcome to today's talent track with Michelle Zhou and her distinguished project Potential Newsfeed. If you join us on Zoom, then as usual, please mute your mics, but turn on your cameras. It's nice to see each other. And please feel free to join the Q&A after the presentation or post questions in the chat. And if you're on LinkedIn Live, please post your questions in the event chat and we'll be bringing in them into the session. My name is Ake Rudolf. I'm director of the UX Design Awards and head of strategy at International Design Center Berlin, in short IDZ, the award organizer. The IDZ is a leading independent design institution with more than 50 years of expertise. Our mission is to promote design as a driver of innovation in business and society worldwide. That's also why we founded the UX Design Awards in 2015, to promote the positive impact of people-centered design on our daily lives and to recognize the people and talent who are involved in shaping design and who work in the field. On that note, I'd like to remind you that the call for entries for the next awards for spring 2023 actually is open right now and will be open until the end of November. So if you're working on great experience projects, then make it count and take part. You can have a look at the website for more information, of course. And now, welcome to our virtual event series, featuring designers and teams that were distinguished in the awards. We invite them regularly to present their work and to share knowledge with our professional community. You can actually join us twice a month, roughly, for deep dives featuring professionals and companies, and for talent tracks featuring up-and-coming UX designers. To stay tuned, just follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter. So let me briefly introduce today's case study. Potential Newsfeed is a speculative design project. It explores how social media algorithms affect our consciousness about information consumption. There's 3 scenarios that explore how different levels of transparency and control can help us intervene with the digital system. It is an open-ended project that provokes discussion on how the public, society, technology, and market could engage towards a future social platform. This concept was developed by Michelle Zhou as part of her MA studies at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design. Michelle is a UX and service designer. She completed a bachelor's degree in China, in architecture actually. And then she went on to interaction design at UMEA, Institute of Design in Sweden. And after that, she completed her master's degree in Norway. And now, following this, she joined the consultancy NoA Ignite in Oslo, where she works now as a service and interaction designer. In our preparatory talk, she said something that struck me actually, and I quote her, I don't want to work on solutions, but rather on problems. So the question is not how to design a cookie banner, for instance, but whether we need a cookie banner at all, which speaks, in my eyes, volumes about the influence that designers can have in creating meaningful and responsible products. And this is what she'll be talking about today. So, Michelle, welcome to the awards talent track. And please take it away from here. The screen is yours. Welcome. Hey, here you are.
Hi, thank you, Aka, for the kind introductions. And thank you for everyone joining me today. I'm Michelle saying hi from Oslo, Norway. And now I will share my screen and share my projects. Can you see the full screen of the presentation? Cool. So Potential Newsfeed is my master thesis that I did last year at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design with my supervisor, Musa. And today I'm going to show you the process and insights behind these projects. So today I will first walk you through the context and challenge, and then highlighting the interesting elements in my exploration process. After that, I will show you the 3 speculative scenarios as an outcome and finally share with you my reflections. So in the beginning, let's have a look at how our digital society looks like today. Nowadays, social media is actually dominating most part of our daily life. Taking Facebook as an example, over 2 billion people using it every month, while over 50% of the people using social media as a news source, making the newsfeed the most influential aspect in the news industry. The newsfeed, structured like a waterfall, creates a seamless reading experience that aims for maximum exposure. It might sound to us desirable for sometimes, but it also making us as a passive receiver and taking over our control on information consumption. Have you ever think about why you receive this specific news on your newsfeed? We have no way to poke back to the platform and understand how it interprets our data and how the algorithm makes decisions for us. The complex mechanism on platform is like a black box and almost impossible to integrate. At the same time, we see that social media is facing an urgent request to shift its role with today's political climate and the trust challenges. There is a growing call internationally for greater transparency from the platforms. However, what transparency means in practice is still an open question and sometimes remains as a buzzword. Just as Aka mentioned in the introductions, let's take the cookie concern, for example. How many of us never look through it before clicking to accept it? Even with more interactions on explanations and controls on the cookie features, they're still too complicated or vague to understand. Neither can the user relate themselves to the consequences of the actions. It is maybe too easy a claim to say that we want to make the algorithm visible. But let's try to think one step forward. What exactly are we aiming for when we request for transparency? And what are we hoping for once it is made visible? This is actually a quote that taken from an interview I had with professor in Department of Media at UIO. I find it very intriguing in this topic. So in my projects, I want to tackle two questions. First is how can we review the invisible mechanism on newsfeed and also showing its relationship to us. Second, on top of that, how can we take the discussion a step further on what is a meaningful transparency that really makes sense for users? I have to say this is a very big topic and it's challenging to tackle. My research phase is an explorative journey, zooming in and out, back and forward to understanding the system. Despite some typical activities, I would like to highlight 3 methods I found the most valuable and interesting to unpack the complexity. So the first challenge in front of me at the start is how can we understand the algorithm when it's invisible and even immaterial? So it's not like a book that have thickness that you can just go through it and read through it. Newsfeed is just the screen. So there's one explorations I did in the early phase that I found really helping me is the media diet visualizations. What I did is just simply take a long screenshot of the newsfeed and color code the content in different ways, trying to understand, for example, what type of content do we actually take in every day and how friends influence our newsfeed. Also, how frequent do we receive news? This mapping become great popping artifacts that I bring into later 8 user interviews and trigger a lot of reflections. For example, taking this one, the mapping of frequency of ads. In this map, I try to review how many ads we are receiving without consciousness. It turns out that on average on Instagram, 1 in every 4 posts is advertisement. The frequency is higher than most testers' expectations. So this simple visualization reviews several patterns of algorithm on platforms. They are not very intensive mappings across many people, but they give me a good start to understand the underlying mechanism. The second challenge to me is to define the division between what is controlled by us and what is controlled by the platform. To tackle these questions, I actually take a very concrete approach, simply by mapping all the concrete UI features that link to control and review across 5 mainstream social media platforms. I try to categorize them by the immediacy and the visibility of it, also by what the aspects it targets on. I make this into a library that keeps checking for the platform updates. This map reveals the limitation of control that given to the user, and the details in UI level gives me solid foundations for later ideations and concept development. Another worth to mention is that during the whole process, I involved 5 experts from social media, technology, journalism, and design into the project to bring in insights from different perspectives of the system. Also, a wider audience from different backgrounds, for example, like advertisement, is bringing into the testing to provide feedbacks in a more holistic point of view. To sum it up a little bit, I will share with you the 2 key insights that taken from my research. The first one is uneven power dynamics, and the second one is hiding a business agenda. So the first one, here is a record of all relevant changes to the Facebook newsfeed algorithm in only half a year. It is constantly evolving and shifting its focus. And on the other side is a quote from a journalist working with social media news. He says, as soon as the algorithm behind the recommendation changes, for example, from prioritizing short video to long video, all of our publishers' content undergoes a change. And as these changes are intransparent and without notice, the individual users and content provider are in a very passive position in the power dynamics. The second is the hidden business agenda. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this interface before on Facebook. It is actually a screen Facebook provides to advertisers to do micro-targeting on user. The platform opens up way more controls for advertiser compared to the user. However, we as individuals are excluded from this trade, even though we produce this data. So social media platforms have a business model of advertising around harvesting personal data, just like the famous quote in the social media industry. If you are not paying for the product, then you are the product. It's very important for us to not stay only in solving the symptom, but goes to the root of the cause, which is the business model. So back to my design goal. Rather than picturing more or better control for the current system, I choose to use design as a medium to review the mechanism and share my findings. I wish to use it as a way to provoke concrete discussions on how transparency can change in a system. This is an overview of my concept development phases, starting from trend analysis and what-if filtering, and a lot of several rounds of ideations and rapid prototype. But instead of going into all the detail, I would like to highlight this method, which is future view co-creations. This method is basically putting one what-if scenario in the middle, and then I invite participants from different backgrounds to generate next step with me. By doing this, I create a very simple interface and showing them to trigger ideations. And this process has several rounds iterations with my design artifacts. And in the end, I choose the most thought-provoking stories that involving around and make them into a future scenario. The reason why I choose to do this is, and one important aspect of this project is that I'm not only focusing on the idealist preference for a future that only focusing on users, but also showcasing a consequence happening in the whole system. So in the end, I would like to show you the outcome of the projects. Here is a reminding visualization of how the platform dynamic it is nowadays. My final outcome is actually 3 speculative scenarios on Facebook that shows the potential of power shift from the platform to the people. But it's also challenged the user on the consequences. The first scenario is transparency on business model. What if the business trade on the platform is naked and involving people? This scenario is called pay to control. In near future, Facebook launched a new business model which charges user for data protections. You can pay to free yourself from specific information promotion targeting. Imagine that you are in the next round of elections in US. You can go get notifications for specific type of advertisements, such as political campaign. And you can get you can be transparent to read where this advertisement comes from and how much exactly is paid to targeting you. If you go into the central targeting control, you can also block specific promotion content with corresponding price simply by getting the toggle buttons. You can also review what type of content is the most targeting in your alt text. For example, in this scenario, you can choose to hide your locations for a specific period of time to avoid being targeted by the promotions. And as this is a transparent and open market, the price can fluctuate it if an advertiser decides to higher the price. You might need to raise payment to continue blocking yourself from unwanted targeting when the price fluctuated. So in this scenario, it's actually reviewing a future of new device based on ability to decide what to read. I wonder if you are in this future, are you willing to pay for your data privacy and how much you would like to afford it? Then let's move into the second scenario. It's about transparency on our data checking. What if the tracing of our online behavior is only belongs to the user and free to edit? The second scenario is called content influencer. In this future, social media platforms can no longer store our data. They are forced to become open source. We can see that new software and market emerging for people to locally edit their data. For example, this one, content influencer. It is a software for you to regulate your newsfeed content by switching the data connection. So taking this person, for example, John is a new graduate from high school and soon going to college. He decided to remove specific part of his reading history to not getting similar recommendation on his newsfeed any longer, so as to have a fresh start in the new semester. So you can just curate content based on the inputs that you connect to the platform. And as this data is owned by users, it's actually very free to export the data and sell them on the open market. Say, if you want to read what Elon Musk is reading in a trendy way, you can just buy his preference package and attach that to Facebook. In this way, you can adjust content recommendations on your newsfeed by simply shifting the data package. In this scenario, when the platform becomes a pure connections for user and content publishers, everyone has the potential to become editors. Would you want to sell part of your data to these open markets? Do you think is there any pitfall if social media forced to be open sources? And let's move to the third scenario. It's about transparency on network dynamic. What if your friend's influence on your information consumption is reviewed? In the third scenario, it's called Your Friend is Your News. Imagine a future that Facebook start a new AI system that highlighting the value of friends as the information influencers. For example, on the profile page, it will highlight what type of content a user is mostly contributing in their post and how often they post regularly. Taking Mary as an example, she is a young mother having maternity leave at the moment. She still wants to keep track with her work, but not having enough time to follow up all the news. So what she do is that she can go into the post category and allocate her interest. For example, she just filtered in design, parenting, and local news that related to her life context. And that's the way she can get the most relevant content on her newsfeed. And she can also get an overview on who is playing the biggest role on specific information sources in certain category. For example, like if she go into the design categories, she can see who is actually posting the most that feeding her newsfeed. But to integrate the scoring system, she can simply turning the influence level of friends by drag and replace their hierarchy. And imagine that when you get a new request from a new friend, you can preview and evaluate what information you should bring into your newsfeed. When you receive a request like this, what is in your mind? So this scenario, the new scoring system changes our way from evaluating a friend as intimate relationship to information sources. Do you want to add a friend based on the impact to your newsfeed? Would you consider sharing more consciously and reflectively on your own post? And how much do you think it would change the relationship in your own network? So to conclude, these three concepts present different possibilities of transparency and power shift on the newsfeed. When I present this to the public, it's very interesting to see that it starts to be more visible how the complex mechanism is influencing our choice on information, and also how it linked to our privacy and social life. It's also exciting to see how different stakeholders like markets, regulations, and technologies involve into the potential change while the power shifts to a certain degree. Finally, I would like to share you some reflections in these projects I have. So in general, these projects, I don't want to try to criticize social media or simply describe utopian futures. I think social media newsfeed is actually very young as a theme of things. It's still very new. The newsfeed is only 15 years old compared to TV and broadcast. It's way more young, like a small kid. So I still believe that we have a lot of chance to make changes, and the designer can actually help influence this change in a positive way. And so in these projects, even though I use design not focusing on solving problems directly, but the feedback I gain during the process and during the outcomes, I see that the design can be utilized as a strategies to help us thinking ahead and try to help to expand the public's imaginations. And I believe this is a way to implement in our daily design life to help us to envision the futures and tackling the wicked challenge. So this is the sharing for today. I'm really thanks for joining me today, and I'm hoping to hear your feedback and thoughts on these projects, and feel free to shoot me with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. it's a very short but super concise presentation, and you put so much work into research also, which you didn't cover in all details, because there was, it's not just looking into the future and thinking about possible scenarios, but there was a lot of user research, conceptualizing, interviews, testing involved. So it's also great to see how future scenarios are built on facts and a solid process. And thank you for targeting such an important issue, which actually came from several posts also from the community, in a very novel way. So to start off, I would like, well, first, everybody out there, please, if you have any questions, post them into the chat on LinkedIn. We'll bring them in to the talk, or on Zoom, just raise your hand and join the conversation, or direct message me. But Michelle, I wanted to ask you, just for starters, what triggered the idea of the project? I'm wondering now.
So you mean like triggering the concept in the very beginning?
Yes, what was your idea? Why did you start on this thematic?
Yeah, so when I started to think about what I would like to do in my diploma, I realized that there probably can be the one unique chance that I can do anything that only follow my curiosity and interest. So I choose to follow things that happen, like evolving in my head for a long time, is the constantly changing landscape of the news and social media. And I can feel that it is having impact in my everyday life. I start to questioning why I lost trust on the social media. I start to questioning why I lost controls on my reading habit. And these things I can feel that there's a lot of things connected to it. And I decided to do a very explorative project that try to find the answer.
So I'm wondering, because you did a lot of research and you started with a very big question. Why is this happening, and why am I part of this, and what's behind it actually? And of course, nobody except those who are writing the algorithm really know. I'm wondering, during your research, were there any surprises to you? Something you didn't expect?
Yeah, I can recall one immediately, is when I start this broad topic. As I mentioned, I try to involve experts in the early phase to give me inspirations and help me find focus. And there's one interview I talked with an expert in technology. He's a data scientist and algorithm scientist. And when I asked what is his thought and his understanding about algorithm on social media, it's surprisingly that he said he don't understand that well, because he's the expert for specific algorithm. And there is not just one algorithm. It's a complex word weaving together. So algorithm is just a thing that we're always talking about, seems like it's objective, but it's not. It's the humans behind it and business behind it. And at that point, I realizing, yes, so even the expert couldn't explain it. But how about designer? Can we do something, since we are so close to the user and we have some skills to visualizing things? So I think that's something I find both surprising and inspiring in the beginning.
Right, and you also did some research with people from different fields and industries, and also people involved in advertising or social media. And I remember that you talked also with advertisers, and they didn't have they weren't only skeptical about your concept, right? There was also I remember seeing a slide. There was something positive also, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Or am I mistaken?
It's interesting when I bring like people from specific professional backgrounds into discussions. The first impression of them, they are still putting the shoes of they as a user experiencing it. And it's after I remind them that how about putting your shoes in your professions, they start to think about another perspective, like, okay, for advertisement, how these things can benefit me. And then I can see this conflict happening as their role as a person and as a role as a industry professionals. And yeah, I'm sorry, Am I answering the questions in the right track?
Oh, there is no right or wrong. I'm just thinking about what happened in the process. I remember there was even a quote on one of your slides that an advertiser said, "Oh, one of the scenarios maybe wouldn't be that bad because we would be able to gauge pricing for people who are, you know, interested even to pay money not to see adverts and know who are the more valuable users somehow." So they already twisted it in their way, of course.
It is. It's very amazing that they see the opportunity of putting in the business value in any scenarios that could happen, which is a good thing. Yeah.
Yes, and actually, this is something that struck me, that you worked in a very pragmatic way. So there is no thinking about regulations or policy or restrictions. And this is also that's why you came up with these such a thought-provoking scenarios, because you approached this from a quite market-oriented way, I think. And I'm wondering, what was this like a conscious decision to focus on people, not policy, to do like a market-oriented approach?
I think that's a very intriguing comments for me as well. I didn't very intentionally think that I should be market oriented when I creating scenario. But it's, as I mentioned in the key findings, what I find is that first, this thing is a systematic thing. There is power dynamic in it. And the second, the root cause is always linked back to the business model. And it's maybe too idealistic if we put that away and just create a super utopian scenario that giving back all the data controls and privacy to users. And my goal of the projects is to try to let people to realize the complexities and balancing in it, so they can know the root cause why they cannot get the transparency. And if we want to get the transparency to some degree, what we should or what we need to sacrifice to balancing the system.
Yes, so that's why I would like to talk a little bit about the three scenarios with you. So I'm also wondering, all three of them, you charted them on the probability on the future prism slide. So the first was possible, so plausible, and the third was probable. So is this also, does this relate to how quickly, how fast people think they could become reality? Or is it not related?
Yeah, I think that is some, when I try to positioning them in this spectrum, is I try to see how people related to how close this implemented to their life. I don't have a strong opinion on which one can be implemented in real life in the shortest time, but I have assumptions on that the network is the most easier one, or less dangerous to open it in a way, since social media is have a lot of dynamic around it, and the business model is the one that most hidden and being protected by the platforms and even harder to tackle it. So that's how I position those scenarios in my head when develop them. But I'm sure that the audience have different thoughts about that. Maybe you have different thoughts about these three scenarios, how soon they will be implemented or how realistic.
Well, let us know. We will be love to hear from you. So the one that you think, Michelle, was maybe more probable was number 3, right? The transparency, or your friend is your news, right? Because it's so close to the way that social media platforms already function.
Yes.
And you don't have to touch the business model of the platform. So there is actually Sonali Sood, who is a psychology student, who posted that he also actually liked the concept of like-minded people who request and control the newsfeed. But he wonders, but then how come we get to know the other fields? So talking about then falling probably even more into a bubble, right?
Yes.
Do you think that's a problem?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. In the third scenario, when I create this or in general, when I create 3 scenarios, I try to not putting my own judgment into it, but open it up for the audience. For example, when I show the 3rd scenario to audience, one comment I get is that it's so dangerous. It can be even more filter bubbles because people turn into be comfortable. And the most comfortable thing is staying in the zone that they are familiar with. So I think it's a really good comment because it's showcasing that the transparency that we request, that we aim for, that taking controls back, is this something that really will helping us for well-being in the real life. That is something that we should questioning. So maybe into some degree that the controlled by the platform can force us to read a little bit more bored. So that's an interesting balance there. So I thank you for your comments. I think it's still open discussions and people have different response relating to themselves. Yeah.
And I really understand how this could work as a social media platform, because your proposal was actually a kind of gamified a solution where you could push people up and down on a hierarchy according to whether you want to hear more or less from them. But do you think that, or does your research show that we really want to know how our friends and their interests and attitudes influence our feed? Or is this something maybe we are hesitant to know so much about our friends, and also reflecting about how much we long for certain people's feeds, what this tells about us? Isn't that a problem?
Yeah. So maybe that link to in the media dialect analysis, when I color code one user's newsfeed with their friends networks. So just try to find the connections of who posts the most and who you think is the most valuable people to you, and how actually she's working or he's working on your newsfeed. And it's so interesting that to see the gap again from the perceptions of people to the reality, because the mechanism on most social media platform is just to maximum the activity. So those people who post most, that you see most, that they will rank probably the highest on top. But those people probably not the person that you think should be that worth on your newsfeed. So that gap is something can be a way to tackle, to be more transparent, and the user can participate in integrating the scoring system. So that's one part. And also another thing is about we are facing a lot of platforms, social media platforms are facing the challenge of people are no posting, and people become just like a dead platforms. And so in the 3rd scenario, I try to think in a Facebook strategy way that they try to make people be more conscious and more showcasing what they are posting. So for example, when you have this gamification strategy that you can show that you post a lot on design and you can post a lot about stocks, maybe people would be more aware to go into that directions in a positive way.
Yes, it's true. I think there is no black and white here, as this is all a very fluctuating topic and very personal too. Let's jump to the 1st scenario, which is pay to control, which is very straightforward. I would call it's transparency through your wallet, because you sense the price of ad time actually very directly, but it becomes you a partner, let's say, or a part in the market for advertisement. I wonder if in your research there is a big if, of course, and all of them are made us to think a little bit deeper about this. But would it be okay if only the affluent people who have more money, can afford to block targeting, and people who are poorer can't? Yeah. Is this a part that came up in your research and your thinking?
Yeah, that's envisioning a very a danger future alarm. Because what we are seeing nowadays is a divisions of your awareness or a divisions of your capacity to understand the mechanism, so you can consciously to block yourself or do some things. And there's already some like Chrome, they have extensions on a web page, but not social media, that you can import certain random reading history, that the pretending that you are a specific person to receive, for example, like a very wealthy people will receive this type of advertisements. So, but now when this opening up as a transparency, maybe it become a little bit unequal, because it's not based on our awareness or knowledge of the system. It's purely based on money. So I agree that it's a dangerous future that reveal the divisions of it. So maybe the things about presenting this scenario is that we can then bring into the discussions about how much openness we should provide to the user, thinking about this consequence.
Right, which would then lead to scenario number 2, right? The content influencer, where I would call it, it's makes algorithm transparent because it shows there's actually value in the data. So you realize that your online behavior has a value, but you're also in charge, right? So you can select which amount of your browsing information, your data, you're willing to give away, and even sell it as a part of maybe experiencing the world through your eyes, or even information, as you proposed. It could be like journalists, you know, selling their let's say research path on the in the internet, and you can somehow jump on their shoulder and observe them as they go, right? So this is a more positive, let's say, outlook into where there is much more equality in the system, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting scenario that when I show people, for example, when people comment that, oh, it's like hiring people to train my algorithms. So that, for example, I would want to learn tennis, but don't have time to search for resources. Then I just buy people's training histories. Then I get all the best material that I need. But on the other hand, some people pointing out that, which is interesting because this person has tech background, so he's more conscious, mentioned that even though the another side of open market is the safety issues. So when this become open, it's can happen that your history is be secret edited. So for example, it won't be surprised if you've been hacked and suddenly receiving a lot of fake news or like the mind monitoring to drive you to believe the climate change is good, or like believe that smoking is okay. And one specific scenario, from the user feedback is that he imagined that, for example, his girlfriend want to buy something, but don't want to mention it to him. So she tried to go to his history and putting some elements about both chips, and you have to, let's buy something for your girlfriends, and then try to manipulate his thoughts. So it's so interesting to see how people are trying to expand my thoughts. Sometimes I cannot think that there's a pitfall, but people point it out.
Yeah, there is some frightening elements in there. I think as soon as we throw ideas out, there can be a lot of directions into how tools can be used or misused or used to certain ways. But still, I'm wondering, in scenario number 2, where you can sell a package of your browsing history of your data as an influencer, let's say, would that create even more sealed social bubbles because you're looking at the world through the eyes of one person? What do you think? Yeah,
that's an interesting thought. I would like to hear. It's like, I feel like we are going into this co-creations future view together now. We are trying to draw out one sequences after another's. And it feels like I even want to start drawing the interface and imagine the even further system now. I think that could potentially happen. And if that happens, we also need to see how this have the link effect to the regulations part, and how regulation will react for this pitfall. So I don't have an immediate answer for this one now, but I would really encourage people to join us to think about, if this happens, what can be constrained to not making this ethical pitfall happen.
And of course, it could also create more diversity, because you would learn about others people's sources and points of views, which you might, not find yourselves, right? So there's always pros and cons.
It is. It's so interesting that when you raise these consequences questions, we see that when the transparency and controls open a bit more, the problems comes a bit more. When we open a little bit up, we need to think about a lot of regulations around it to avoid the bad consequences. So which also reveals that it's not an easy task to just claim that, oh, let's open it totally as open source. We need to think it carefully and envision the step and consequences around every small decision.
Yes, this also somehow touches on Sonali Sood's post over LinkedIn, and she wrote that actually some of her friends are not using social media anymore because of data privacy issues. She wonders, do we need to worry about data privacy in future? I mean, we need to worry about it already, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Also, sorry to interrupt you, but you also noted when we talked before that actually there is platforms are already being forced to act in certain ways. So maybe you could expand on that also a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is a good signal to mention. Like a lot of people are proactively away from social media and try to take back controls of their life because of concern. And it's also positive to see that because of so many people have awareness and the regulations coming up, that there are more constraints on social media. They have to make changes on policy, data privacy. And we see that we already have changes this year on cookies. So now the cookies has new regulations. We probably don't have cookies anymore. And we have a strong regulations on checking people's behavior for advertisements. So back to what I mentioned in the end, I am optimistic about the change since it's still very young as a thing for social media newsfeed. And I think what the audience just mentions now is a good sign that we are trying to act in our way to push back to the social media to do changes.
Yes, that's absolutely true. We are sometimes just by the convenience or just by being pushed by the group, forget that we do have a choice. And actually, this is also the force of the market. If you step away from a platform, then after a while, they will sense and react. But Michelle, so we presented and we talked a little bit about your 3 scenarios. So the first one was to pay to control quite easily. You can pay not to see ads. The second was the content influencer, where you can sell packages of your data and become a part of let's say, even an information market. And the third scenario was that your friend is your news. So you decide which news you get from which people according to your interests at a given time. So I'm wondering now, it's a personal question to you, which one is your favorite of these scenarios and why?
Yes. Yeah, me personally like the second one the most, because like the 3 scenario, they all reveals what is existing nowadays already. Like they reveal the mechanism, how it works already. Like the pay to controls, it's already there. You just make it reveal, and the way we trade it can be changed. And the third scenario is also is there, but we make it transparent and make people have the power to intervene it. And the second is something that may be most innovative in terms of it's not yet there. And it's more envisioning when the data privacy regulation really change and do big change. Then we will have some very dramatic change in the whole market. And that scenario is envisioning potentials on that. And so me personally, very looking forward to see how the updates on that scenario, whether it will come in some days.
And of course, this is the most drastic scenario because it basically gives the power over usage data to the user exclusively, right?
Yeah.
So that's still a long way to go.
Yeah, it is.
Well, maybe a step into ethical design, because you're a designer, and of course you just started your career. And but what do you think from your point of view at the moment? So can designers actually influence product development to create more responsible solutions? Do designers have the power to do so? Because of course you don't work on your own. You work within an agency that has dynamics and has to earn money, that works for a client, that has goals. So how can design actually do something and leverage?
Yeah, this is a good question. It's also something I keep thinking and reflecting during and after these projects. When I bring other designer into this project, some of them are already working, and some of them even working in social media, big tech companies. But it seems like even though we can imagine and try to imagine the futures, but even though they're working at the tech companies, it's hard for them to have power to make changes for very higher hierarchy for strategy changing. But they also they also give me feedback that when I bring these discussions on to the table, it helped them to leave the chair for a while and standing out of their daily work and start questioning not only creating a form of these cookies, but also thinking why we need a cookies. So I think to one degree, on one hand, it's a long-term thing and it's a collective things. It's probably in the industry we don't have that much time and to think about these questions, but we need to still spend some time to think about these questions and have a collective group to think this together. And I see that also when you're referring to the ethical role of designer, I see that there is already some organizations are hiring designer specific for ethical explorations or finding solutions. For example, the UK government, they have a lab that is specifically adapting speculative and future thinking to tackle some social challenge. And that's a very optimistic change that they are valuing designers in strategy making process. And also like Google, they also have an experiment lab on well-being. Of course, when we look at the website, it still remains as explorations. They are not implemented, but it's still a good sign that we are getting more and more voice into the systems. And I sincerely hope that, for example, like social media like Facebook, they can maybe sometimes, I think they should, for long-term envisioning and for their goods, to establish a department to specifically targeting ethical things, not just trying to publish news, react to it, but also making actions to it. Yeah, so I hope this approach can be implemented in some organization someday.
So a last question. If you were to meet representatives of a social network, because this is what your work is all about, what would you wish to talk with them about? Let's say you meet executives from Facebook. What would you like to talk with them about?
Yeah, I think I would like to bring directly them to work through those scenarios. And then I will also show them a map of this view. I would like to first invite them to make their comments on each scenario, how they will react as organizations, how they position them to this scenario to come. And I will also want to invite them to think about, for example, after 2 or 3 years, with all this trending in the industry, what could be happen the most likely as a scenario? And then we can together react to it.
Great, that's very good words and very wise words, because change doesn't happen overnight. So anyone working in the social media platform industry, tech, feel free to reach out to Michelle, because her experience and her work surely offers great insights.
Thank you.
Dear Michelle, thank you very much for your presentations. And it's been a pleasure to talk with you. We could go on forever. And good luck for your next projects, of course.
Thank you, Aka. It's my pleasure today. And thank you for everyone joining today. And let's keep in touch.
Yes, and as you said, there's many platforms apart from the UX Design Awards and our events where you can also talk about critical design as well. So thanks for everyone who joined us today. And if you missed anything, the recording of the talk will be up on LinkedIn right away and on YouTube, and our website, of course, available for a long time. So our deep dives and talent tracks will continue in the coming weeks and months. We will feature the winners of the autumn season of the UX Design Awards 2022 very soon. So stay tuned for more. Follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, social media again, and subscribe to our newsletter, which is just a one-way channel. And become part of our global UX community, of course. We would love to have you on board and have you with us. Looking forward to welcome you to our next events, and of course, maybe as participants, even in the awards as well. Until then, stay well, have a lovely day, morning or evening, wherever you are, and bye-bye, and see you very soon again, hopefully.